thanks to everybody who's here to hear this great talk today. No, I'm assuming it's going to be a great talk. So,
It'll be different.
Thanks for being here, and I'm really grateful to our out-of-town artists who traveled here to be a part of the show, Stephen Hall, and John Sabra, and Albertus Gorman, or Al, and I've asked Sue Spade to moderate this. Sue is she's a professor, adjunct professor at NKU
And UC.
and UC, and has owned an art gallery, has worked was a curator for the Contemporary Art Gallery here. She worked in the financial district in New York, so she's got a varied background, and I think she'll be a great question asker and interviewer for this conversation. And
what makes me even more relevant is I wrote 5 books on art and ecology. So this
there she goes. So she's a big person to be a part of this. Without any further ado.
I'll start by asking them to give a statement about them.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So we're going to ask the panelists to give a 1 or 2 statement, a description of your career or your life or whatever you want to say that's relevant to this talk.
Well, I'm entirely self-taught. Apparently I got my mom, I was drawing when I was 3 years old, and she kept some of those drawings that were like of birds. So nature was always a part of my thing. I travelled the world, never thought of myself as an artist. Met a woman from New York, came to New York at the beginning of the 80s when East Village was exploding with art galleries. And her parents were very supportive and said, "You should be an artist." And I went, "Yeah, okay." And I was right place, right time, where galleries were opening up, and I started painting and selling work. I went through abstraction and all different kinds of surreal stuff until eventually, over the past, I'd say 10, 15 years, I started getting more activist involved about gender, nationalities, and painting people from all different places and mixing them up. Till eventually, about 10 years ago, the ecology started bothering me, but loss of habitat and climate change. And that's how I got to this. I mean, I've refined my work to a point where I want it to be not really open to interpretation. It's a clear image with a clear message, and I'm trying to shout. But make beautiful paintings. That's a synopsis.
John?
Yeah.
They're trying to make it so I can't ask so many questions.
I am a distinguished professor of art at Ohio University in Athens, Ohio. I chair the painting and drawing program and the digital art and technology programs there, and I work with environmental engineers and environmentalists to clean up coal mine waste, turn that into a product that can actually be sold to pay for the cleanup of the streams that are being polluted by it. And to do that, I use those things that actually end up being pigments in my paintings to try to bring awareness to our project.
Awesome.
I'm Albertus Gorman. Was born in Holland. I'm an Army brat, traveled around quite a lot. Went to UC. I have my MFA from here. My degrees are in drawing though, but I got to a place where the ecological imperative I was feeling, I couldn't draw a picture of it and feel as satisfied with my own personal involvement. So as it turns out, where I live in Louisville, there's a really remarkable park that gives me lots of materials and gives me a perfect stage to kind of muse upon these kinds of things, and I play with art and experiment and have a good time.
Great. So you've already answered one of the questions I was going to ask you. So anyway, if we're going to begin, I'm going to begin with 2 very general questions that everyone can answer, and then I have some more specific questions for each of the artists. So the first general question is, do you consider yourself activist artists? And you brought that up.
Yes.
But is this, okay,
100%.
okay.
No.
Okay, good. Okay, so what does it mean to be an activist artist then? Like, what does it mean not to be one?
Well, here's an act. Oh, not to be one.
Yeah, what does it mean not to be one? Like that, can you help yourself? Like, can you avoid being an activist?
Probably not. I'll qualify that a little bit. I mean, in all the years I've been doing what I've been doing very publicly, I don't think I've convinced anybody of anything.
Okay, there you go.
You know, when it comes to
That's
using this styrofoam from the activist point
Uh-huh.
of view, I don't know if I've been effective in that kind of way, which has actually caused me to think about other kinds of strategies to try to reach people.
Okay, I just want to tell a little anecdote. So occasionally I'm on a panel of all women, and there's always a woman who's like, I'm not a feminist. And then the other people are like, wait, you have to be a feminist. So this is where we're going, I think. I have this real definition. Yeah, but I think you brought up a really good point, that you feel like, I don't mean to point at you, but that you brought a good point, that like, to be an activist, you feel like you have to change people's minds, or you have to make some impact. And we all have this view that art is a great vehicle for that, but how does it work, and how do we do that? So, do you have a better strategy?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think other people can judge whether my strategy is effective or not, but I used to go to a lot of protests, make a lot of noise, write a lot of letters, very, very active. And then one day in about 2003, my wife was in Novak, the lovely Carmita, and our daughter was very young, and I wrote a letter protesting the 2003 invasion of Iraq for the second time, and somebody doxed me. So at our family home, we received hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pieces of hate mail.
Wow.
And to Albert's point, I was like, I'm not changing anybody's mind. I'm not doing a damn thing.
Did you display them as a work of art?
It scared the shit out of me. So I did. And that was when actually I realized that the activist aspect, that I wasn't actually being activist. I was just being noisy. And so that was when I began to look at sustainability and ecology, something more local, something I could feel that I could have an activist impact on.
And get stakeholders.
There you go. And it took me a while to get to the place where that happened, but that was probably about 5 or 6 years after that, yeah.
Okay, and Stuart, Stephen, sorry. I was thinking of Stuart Hall, the very famous British story. Okay, Stephen, how do you see yourself as an activist, and how do you...
Well, it's kind of...
Are you interested in changing people's minds, or just making them think?
Well, interesting. Changing minds is difficult. Certainly, I'm documenting. I'm putting it out there. I'm like John said. I'm shouting. It may not change too many people's minds, but I also enjoy having students and school children come and see my work and talk about my work. So it's like educational. It's a tough time to change people's minds about anything, really. But I feel if I make a beautiful painting, it's not open to too much interpretation, as I said before. It's being active. It's not going to change too many people's minds, but it's being out there. It's not hiding under the table. It's you know.
Okay, super. Okay, so my next question is really related to this one, but I have a little more details. So can art change people's minds and especially their behaviors? So that's even more important. We want people to act differently. We don't want people just to think differently, because that's not really going to help us. So if so, how does this happen? And I'm going to give a little anecdote. I asked this question since I'm about to publish the monograph, Making Values Explicit, on how we are moved to do, act, care, and change. So for the last 10 years of my life, this has been a big topic for me. Like and I asked this question. I know, for example, one of the points that Paul points out in his documentation is that the data doesn't work. Information doesn't change people's minds. People know that driving an SUV is worse than driving an electric car. They know all these things, but they just do these things anyway. So I spent a long time thinking about it, and I know that we're supposed to believe that artworks change people's minds. And I have figured out how they do, but I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to let them tell you. But the question is, how does artwork work in a way that's very different than like a documentary film or reading an article in the newspaper? So I'm going to stop for there.
I don't know.
You don't know? You don't know?
Actually, no, I don't know what's the difference. I mean, art is given this sort of pedestal where it's supposed to be important and impactful. So if people look at it and they think, oh, I'm going to think differently now. I don't know if that happens that much. You know, maybe some little influence will seep in. But I'm not sure. I'm really not sure.
Does it do?
Yeah, I think if you don't mind, Albert, this is cool. Okay. I think that it was surprising at first that I got the reactions that I got, because when I began making the circular, more abstracted paintings, because I was a hyper-realist for 15 years or so, the response I got wasn't that they got it right away, it was that the audience actually found something of themselves in it and then came to me. And what that provided, which I did not anticipate, was an opening for conversation. So there's another level to that where, yes, a lot of different things can open conversation, but I think that the kind of practice of an individual making these kinds of artworks, it puts the responsibility on an individual to like talk to other people about it. And when they hear then that there is a subtext to it that actually the materials that are used in this are part of an activist process to environmentally intervene. When they hear that, a lot of them ask very specifically, what can I do? I didn't know that an individual could make a difference just doing whatever they're doing. What can I do? And then it's responsible, I think, the responsibility about it shifts to me as the artist at that time to enable them in any way that I can, which is sometimes very limiting, sometimes good, but yeah, that's what I'd say.
Okay, and Albert, just you.
Children get it. And so I take a lot of cues from them. And one of the things I have found with my art form, I'm surprised how many people want to come along with me to the river and make stuff, right? And that to me becomes the real key to things. We all have an aesthetic dimension. And I wonder how fully most people live their lives aesthetically, right? There's something about being out at the river when I make something like that. It's really not about that as much as about everything else around it, you know?
So you've created a social practice around this, is that right? So you
I don't know if I call it a social.
you would
but
have to call it a social practice. Then you're gonna cross that bridge.
to be pinned down.
What did you say?
I'm reluctant to be pinned down that way
I'm
because
teasing you.
I
know you can be a sculptor and do
Oh, sure.
have a social practice, but the fact that you're engaging people.
I just think that if you can help people apprehend an aesthetic dimension, that is the thing. It
Okay.
doesn't matter necessarily what you're doing. If you do it with any kind of care or love, I think that goes a long way. People can respond to that. Children understand what's going on in the world better than the parents do, right? It's quite amazing.
So in my research, one of the things I've uncovered is that I think what happens, so the reigning theory for like the last 30 years is something about emotions, that artworks unlock people's emotions. But I was really resistant to that because I know like you might have an emotional response, but then you get distracted and you're like, oh, I was sad about that image, but now I'm like, okay, well, you know what I mean? It's not something that sticks with you. So the question is, what sticks with us? And I've decided, I might be wrong, but this is my working theory, was that artworks somehow unlock our access to our values. We all have values. We don't know what they are because we don't spend any time going like, what are my values? Or what do I believe? But if we did, we might be able to think that, so when you tell people that you're extracting these pigments from acid mine drainage and blah, 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 they're like, oh, that relates to my values because I know that it's a waste. And especially, we're going to get to it in a second, but especially when you tell them, oh, we actually import 240,000 tons of this stuff when we could be making it right here in our own community. So this is the point, like that. So I think artworks, whether it's because of through discussion or through images that make you think about things, they somehow give us access to our values. It's my working theory. So it's not emotions. And values are things that stick with us for a long time. We do change our values, there's no doubt about it. But usually we keep our values, but we morph them to adapt to new beliefs. So for example, let's say in the last 25 years, the big issue was like same-sex adoption. Initially people was like, that's not a family. But then finally you're like, well, that is a family and I can see how it works. And I have family values, so maybe I'm gonna go for same-sex adoption, right? That's how we switch. So we switch our belief, but we kept our value. Anyway, I'm just bringing this up to let you know why I'm asking these questions, because I do know that artworks change people's ideas about things. I've been in the art world for 40 years. I've seen the world change, and I can actually pinpoint art experiences and artworks that had this kind of impact on people. But anyway, but they are not very good editorials. That would be my argument. My argument would be, you want to make a good editorial, you want it to be clear, but most artworks I think are terrible editorials, but that's actually really good, because that means that the people aren't fighting with what they don't agree with. You know, when you read an editorial, you're like, that guy's an idiot. Like, why would they write that? I can't, you know, you're already closed down. But when you're like, I don't even know what they're trying to say, and I'm trying to figure it out, then you're, anyway, okay, I went wrong. It's not about me, but I just wanted to give you some background. Okay, so Stephen is my first interviewee. All right, so many of your paintings depict a single animal in a life-threatening situation, akin to a fish out of water. For this show, you are presenting 3 paintings inspired by advertising images, what you call eco-pop. What is the fine line between images that get people to reflect on their consumption patterns and those that encourage consumption, as advertising does? So have you thought about this fine line? Because you really tread on it. I think you could be, encourage me by that beautiful orange polar fleece, or Arctic fleece jacket.
This is how it evolved.
Okay.
My wife is my manager.
Okay.
She's in charge of talking to Paul and organizing exhibits and selling and pricing and such like. And at one point, where most of my work at the time was based on animals and discussing environments and forest fires and animals and such like. And she said, "Could you please paint something less sad?"
Oh, I don't think they're sad.
I don't either. I don't either. But
But I actually don't like catastrophe art, so I'm glad that they're not sad. Okay, go on.
So I woke up one morning and sat up in bed. I'm going to paint a red puffy jacket because that just appealed to me as an image.
Okay.
Because when I paint these paintings, I want to paint a turtle, and then how do I fit it into my message? I want to paint a toucan, because I love a beautiful toucan. How can I fit it into my message? So I thought a red puffy jacket is kind of like a pop image that the kids will like, or whatever.
Okay.
And how can I fit that into my message? So I was trying to paint something that was ostensibly less sad animal environment, but it's actually about rising sea levels and non-biodegradable over-consuming.
Yes.
So that was the first one. Then I did the sneaker, which is a big pop image. And I saw like lines of people waiting for the next sneaker to be bought outside of stores in New York. And mostly it's like urban kids. So it's consumerism and wasting money against melting ice caps. I've now slipped slowly to slightly sadder, burning forests and, consumerism.
We had a big debate. Is it a patent leather jacket or is it pleather?
It's a leather jacket, a very expensive patent leather jacket.
Oh, it is patent leather. Okay. All right. Okay, so what is this fine line? You just said you don't really know. You're just trying to stay on one side. You're not trying to...
I'm trying to make it, listening to my wife's advice, it's because we do have to make a living as an artist. We don't have second jobs.
Mhm.
So to try and make something on the surface appears more poppy, that's why I called it eco-pop, because I'm still going to go on about my image, but still talk about the same stuff.
Okay, all right. All right. Is everyone satisfied? Okay. Don't worry, we're going to have another chance to grill them. Okay, Stephen, do your paintings connect consumption patterns to environmental degradation, or are they more visual pun, like the puff jacket, sea level rise, the patent leather forest fire? For example, I can imagine a turtle getting caught in an oil slick, but I'm less sure of the relationship between Nike and climate change, especially since Nike is one of the rare companies that aims to reduce its carbon footprint by 63% in 2020 and be zero carbon by 2020. I actually consider the white tennis shoe phenomenon whereby everyone's changing their shoes like every month, obviously more blameworthy because I have my same Nike shoes since 2017. So they're really well. But anyway, so I want to know how do you relate that Nike tennis
Well, I
shoe?
didn't target Nike per se.
Well, it's a swoosh.
Well, obviously it's a Nike sneaker, but I'm not targeting the company.
I don't feel like you are either, but it's
an aesthetic. I mean, I didn't find a red, gold, and white sneaker. I just found a nice shape that I liked.
Okay.
I decided to make part of it gold to make it more glamorous, more expensive looking.
So it's really a fictional sneaker.
It's a fictional sneaker against the backdrop. It's about consumerism and melting ice caps.
All right. Okay.
Pretty simple.
All right. Okay. So you all right. So for you, would it work just as well if you didn't have the Nike logo on it?
Yeah. But I do target generally big corporations.
I understand that. And I don't even know how honest Nike is about their program to be zero carbon by 2050, right? It could easily be virtual signaling. I'm just trying to think of this relationship between, what'd you say?
And slave labor.
Yes,
Well,
exactly.
Well, they supposedly got rid of that. I don't really know. I don't know the details. But anyway.
I'm going to just chime in here for a second, because I don't see it being about Nike. I see it being about consumerism, Nike being the top of the food chain of this particular item. This is what people are buying. You realize that people are spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars on these sneakers over and over and over again without thought to how they're made or anything like that. So, it could be Adidas, it could be Puma or whatever. To me, it's the iconography of consumerism more than it is the
That's my question. Is it
Well,
really?
that's my intention.
If people wear Nike shoes for 10 years, is it really for me, the white K-Swiss is way more, the one that gets changed every month because it got a little scuff on it. Okay. All right, so now we're going to grill John. Okay. All right, so it's clear that you have the infamous blue marble image in your mind. How do you envision people reacting to the brown marble with a river running through or a psychedelic marble? I suppose scale is important. They're abstract enough that one may be zeroing in on a tiny dot or images of potential planets. Anyway, so that's a question about how do you envision people reacting to these different marble, these alternative
Yeah.
marbles?
I stopped thinking about that.
Okay.
Because I used to think about it all the time.
That's a good answer. I used to have a boyfriend that's, his answer to everything was, enough said.
Well, it's a funny thing because I was good at drawing. You know what I'm talking about, Albert. I was good at drawing. It was all I had, so I was like, I can draw stuff. And people were like, wow, you can draw stuff. I was like, yeah, I can draw stuff, So when I started painting, I was like, I can paint stuff like I can draw stuff. And I'm like, oh yeah, you can paint stuff that looks like stuff. I was like, yeah, I can. And it made me feel great. And I love all those people about those things. And when I had like a crisis, which is a long story, too long to tell here, and I ended up painting abstracts, which freaked the hell out of my dealer at the time. He really threw him for a loop. I hoped that people would see what I see in it, and I started explaining them, and over-explaining them from my perspective of why I chose those colors and why I made that thing. Which, to your point, is correct, that I was thinking about probably the blue dot, certainly issues of scale, but very much into astronomy and all that kind of stuff.
Alternative planets.
Yeah, that too. I think about that a lot. I think about that too much. But basically, once it got to the place where the public was encountering them, then I realized that it was way more interesting and valuable to me for people to come and tell me what scale they found in them. And so I stopped thinking about that. So a lot of these, none of these places you see here are like real spaces, right? These are like amalgamations of different images and different things. They all have to do with water in this series more recently because this is where I'm at in waders all the time, right? And I'm thinking about wetlands like these two over here and that fourth one over there. In the middle one here. This is really thinking about wetlands because I'm building a wetland and I'm like, what's a wetland? How do you do that? And making some embarrassing observations that turn out to be false. But I want them to be beautiful. I want them to be awesome. And I want people to walk in them and go like, wetlands, we love wetlands. Why don't we have more wetlands and all this stuff? And that's what I hide. Because if I go and tell people that or I have that expectation, that's not what's going to happen anymore.
Right. And they might even say, oh, I don't like, it's swamps.
Yeah, exactly, right? Swamps, And so I'll have people come one right after the other, and one will see one and go like, wow, this reminds me of this little petri dish experiment I did when I was blah, blah, whatever. And I was like, yeah, let's talk about, eco, whatever. And somebody else is exactly what you said. They're like, this is like the nebula of the whatever. I'm like, yes, it is. Fantastic. And so that conversation gives me entry to someone's sense of scale. Their sense of scale, as you pointed earlier, is maybe where the value resides. So that's why I kind of eschew that sort of intentionality, but love when other people come to it with their intentions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to bring everyone's attention to, there's a Tintoretto exhibition at the museum that just opened on Thursday evening.
The Tintoretto? Sure.
Yeah. And it just, it only has 3 paintings, but you should go see it. But because the thing they've done, they had to, oh my God, what did they, not restitute, what did they do? Restore these paintings.
Yeah.
And they took off literally 8 layers of paint since the beginning. But the thing that's amazing is they have pigment analyses, and they see that Tintoretto is grinding all this stuff, and they have these amazing images of all the stuff in the clay. You'll be really fascinated. It's a really interesting. Anyway,
That's awesome.
so they have exquisite forensic analyses of this complex paint pigment applications. Okay, so when I came on Tuesday, I said to Paula, oh, AMD, is that acid-mined drainage? She says, I don't know, I have to look it up. Okay, luckily I kind of knew what it was. All right, so I assume acid-mined, AMD stands for acid-mined drainage, the reddish byproduct seeping out of abandoned mines hit by rainwater and leaching into surface water such as creeks and streams.
Yep.
All right, so I'm going to go into all the details. So can you explain the process royal actions True Pigments plant uses to extract the toxic iron oxide hydroxide, aka rust from AMD, in Milford, Ohio? Okay, that's a lot of pronouns coming at you. The gist of the story is he lives in Athens and he's involved with this Rural Actions, and Rural Actions has invented this. They worked with an OU scientist. They created a new facility called True Pigments where they're extracting the iron oxide hydroxide out of the stream, and that's what he's using to make the paintings. So what's the process?
Yeah, so that was me moving to Ohio. I didn't know it was a state. I moved to Ohio, took a job at Ohio University, and got to know my local environment through some amazing environmental faculty. And they took me to these smelly sulfur orange streams, and they're like, this is acid-mined drainage, this is AMD. And they were like, this is iron oxide sludge. And to your point, I was actually fascinated in undergrad. They had just finished analyzing with that new technology, the Rembrandt paintings, to determine what was workshop, what was Rembrandt, and all that stuff. So I was fascinated by pigments and the history. So thank you for the tip on that Tintoretto. I'm going there. And so I was like, hey, I paint with this stuff all the time. So has like people since the earliest cave paintings, red ochres, iron oxides. I was like, can I make paints out of this? And they're like, we don't know. Took a jar, went back to my studio, made the worst junk you've ever seen in your life. Did not work at all. Terrible idea. On the soccer field, watching my kid play soccer, one of our friends comes up and says, I'm getting my PhD. My professor needs help from an artist. I said,
Okay.
okay, no problem. Went and had coffee with this guy who's confusingly his name is Guy. And he said, I'm trying to make pigments out of this acid mine drainage stuff. I said, I can save you some trouble. It's horrible. And he goes, no, I think chemically I know how to do it, but I don't know how to make it good and awesome. I can do it, but it's got to be good pigment. I need your help. I said, sure. That was 2010. And then we brought Rural Action on board to Michelle Shadlin-Guyver, who is our partner with there. She's awesome, and she's the one who began True Pigments LLC, which is our commercial branch, which is actually going to sell the pigments on the market. We'll be generating about 2 million pounds a year of sustainably sourced iron oxide pigment that we can sell to pay for the running of the plant, double the tax base for the Millfield area, and then we can usurp imported iron oxides from elsewhere.
But
that's what we do.
I'm under the impression that True Pigments is the facility.
No.
Where is this extraction process taking place?
Right here. No, it's actually.
It's not taking place there, because you
It
can't
is
process 5 million, however many million pounds of it.
I don't sleep much too.
She's
So-
spitting it out.
So basically, this is in True Town, Ohio, which is we call it True Pigments LLC. True Town is a tiny little burb on the outskirts of Millfield in the
Right.
Millfield Township area. And that place right now is the #1 priority acid mine pollution site in the state of Ohio.
Right?
And so right there, through Rural Action and an anonymous donation, we purchased 38 acres. And we have prepped the ground now through an AMLA grant of 1.2 million, so we are ready to build the plant.
Oh, it hasn't been built yet.
Correct.
Okay.
We're currently working with 3.8 million in infrastructure money, and within about 2 months, we'll go to the Ohio Controlling Board and say, please give us $30 million so we can build a plant by 2026.
Okay, so my first question was, what is the process?
The process is very easy.
Okay, how do you get, okay, thank you.
Okay, so you dig underground, you haul out the coal, you expose rock walls that have been buried for 300 million years. Water gets in through rain, there's oxygen in the water, it hits the exposed rock walls which have pyrite and iron in it. That pyrite is sulfur. Sulfur gets in the water, makes sulfuric acid, leaches heavy metals out, which is iron. It's all dissolved, it's all crystal clear. Water comes out somewhere because water's gonna find a way. Finds a way to get in the creek, gets in the creek, hits that creek, hits oxygen and sunlight. Now suddenly you have iron oxyhydroxide dropping out. You have lemon juice water that fish can't live in, so it kills 1,300 miles of streams in Ohio alone. What we do is we intercept that pollution before it gets to the stream.
Okay, I see.
Yep. And then we take it out, we neutralize the acidity, so we
With
take it from
base?
yep, correct. Sodium hydroxide or lime, depending on what is, economically viable. Once that is lowered, we precipitate the iron out, then we separate it out, clean water that's neutral, 6.57, that goes through a wetland, right into the creek, safe for fish and aquatic life. The iron then is dried, processed, sold as pigment.
What's novel is that they return the water, because usually the water's distilled or evaporates and doesn't. So this is, they're both creation. So you're creating water too. It's a water plant.
It's true. We try not to say that because people think that when the water
No,
wars
that's
come,
very
we're gonna.
important. That's very important. Okay, so it's insane that we import 240,000 tons of iron oxide yearly to use as tints, that we have plenty of AMD. So that's just a little despair right here, right? So we're importing this a lot from China.
Yes.
So hopefully the tariffs are going to help you.
I hope so.
We found one good reason to have tariffs, so we can save the painters of America.
That made my day, Sue. Thank you for that.
All right, so have you ever visited AMD and Art in Vintonville?
No, not yet.
Did you know about it?
I've heard about it.
Okay, well, let's go together.
Let's do it.
I want to go to AMD and
I
Art.
love
So AMD and Art is a project I wrote about in my 2002 book, and it was a combination of artists and scientists, but they did it the old-fashioned way, where they made settling ponds. And what's beautiful is each settling pond is so distinctly a different color. If I had known we were going to have a moth, actually we could have gotten this image up on the, anyway, whatever. But they used a settling pond, so it's visible. One thing that I like about their project is it completes its task, and it's really visible. You see the orange sludge arriving at the beginning, and after 6 settling ponds, it comes out clean. And I don't know if it evaporates or if it sinks into the thing. We'll have to go and see,
Yeah.
but, all right, okay. And finally, this is the most important question, the most interesting question, I think. So, when I did my research, I realized that Gamlin Paints is only selling them in 3 different colors, but you've got like a wild pineapple,
Mhm.
probably more than even Pantone. So how do you get your different pigments? So how do you get such varying colors such as yellows, blues, purples, and greens, since the Gamblin paints are only available in ochre, red, and violet?
Yeah, good question. So yes, iron oxide can produce anything from a pale yellow to a black. And in that range are violets, oranges, reds, and yellows, and that kind of thing, but they're very earth-based. So the other colors, like your bright yellows, your purples, your blues, and things like that, those are store-bought, commercially available pigments.
Oh, I thought you used different temperatures.
Well, we can to change the color from like a violet, like that violet in the fourth one there.
Okay.
About 85% of that violet is the violet we produce by cooking it at about 2,056 degrees Fahrenheit for about 4 hours.
Okay.
And that will change it from an orange, like say in the center painting, the little bit of yellow-orange stuff, it will change it into that violet.
So you can change the pigment, but you don't have to use it at that temperature.
No, which is a good note. That is a really good clarification, thank you. It's called calcining, so basically, yeah. you
The
heat
only
it
people that
process.
can do this are glass blowers.
Yeah, ceramicists, yeah.
Okay, so, all right, so and also it says in the material that True Pigments is going to produce 5,000 pounds of pigment every day. Is that really true? That sounds like an awful lot of tubes of paint.
Now be closer to 6,000 pounds.
Oh, so even more.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep. It's literally, if you go out there, it's astonishing. It's like jumping 2 cars in the stream every single day.
No, I understand how much there is. That I understand. What I don't understand, what I think is a lot, is how much they're going to be able to process every day. That's the point. It says that they're going to process
Mhm.
5,000 pounds every day,
Mhm.
but that sounds like a lot.
Yeah, we're probably going to batch do it every week.
Okay.
So we'll put it into settling ponds and other things so that we process it initially as a sludge, and then the drying process is where it gets tricky. Producing it, having it drop out of that pollution, and putting that as a sludge that we can then process finally, that's fairly straightforward, and we have a big enough area to do that.
Okay, super.
Yep.
All right, so Albertus. So I was going to originally ask you, are you an accidental artist or a trained artist? But you're not accidental at all.
But I started off in science. I wanted to be a biologist.
Okay.
And if I'd been a better math student, I would have gone that way. But I found that I had everything but that.
Okay.
And I actually developed an appreciation for the abstraction of mathematics after becoming an artist.
Okay, that's fair.
So that's I had other ambitions. I'd like to have been a soccer player too. I don't know. An artist, right? I mean, in my family, the thing was being a soldier. So going to
it sounds
school
like you
and
got
not
it.
being a soldier was
An achievement.
Yes.
Or not an achievement,
that's a matter of point of view.
matter of values. Okay, so I was going to write, I seem to recall you came across your vocation by necessity, but still you are an artist by necessity, I think.
Yeah. Oh yes. I think that's really kind of what shapes who artists are. They are those people that by internal necessity have to make things.
But I had in mind not even the necessity of your internal necessity, but you had to capture all the things floating downstream, including all the yellow ducks fished out of the river from the free store food banks and Rubber Regatta. They're huge contributors to his art practice.
That's not all. I mean, that's part of the
No, I know, but
conceptual collection.
I know, but that's genuinely that's generally Cincinnati trash that you turn into art.
And stuff I've found even north in coming off the Allegheny and Monongahela rivers.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah.
Okay. So you told us you live in Louisville across the Ohio River from the falls of the Ohio State Park in Clarksville, Indiana. It should be called that. So obviously there's falls, and that's probably everything I can imagine.
Actually, there aren't.
There aren't any falls? There were never falls?
It's a bit of a misnomer. It's actually a series of cataracts
okay.
that for about 6 to 8 miles change the elevation of the river. And at Louisville is actually the Ohio River, traditionally before the Army Corps of Engineers turned it into a machine, was a traditionally shallow river. And
Oh, that's why they had to port it to the boats? Because
that's
it was
right.
too shallow.
That's why Louisville's there, we're in New Albany, Jeffersonville, all these little towns in this area, and why there was thousands of years of original human habitation there as well. The Army Corps of Engineers has created a kind of artificial fall in a way. There are a lot of gyres and things. We recently experienced a high water movement just last week, as a matter of fact.
Right, yes.
But yeah, it's what's interesting is that the severity. One of the things when as an artist, I was interested as a layperson. Could I see climate change occurring in my own backyard? And the symptom in our area is the increased amounts of precipitation to where the floods that normally would have been designated, oh, that's a 500-year flood, that's a 1,000-year flood. These things are happening with much more regularity.
Mhm.
That's not the only change. I mean, believe it or not, the interpretive center, which is the place where you can go and get the full hit of what's happened and the significance of this park, there's riprap around the building. And there was a lizard, a Chinese lizard that escaped from the pet trade from Cincinnati
Really?
and rafted down.
It must be one of our masters. I think it's one of our masters.
And they're catching these little Chinese lizards around the interpretive center, right? So that's just one climate change, one kind of, in this case, species that don't belong there, wind up there.
So if it's so shallow, what did they do with steamboats? The steamboats stopped at Louisville? That was like the final destination?
The steamboats were made in New Albany. Yeah, and there've always been around a place for boats to get around.
Did they dredge the river?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, they created an artificial canal for the steamboats to go through that?
In the
area?
1830s.
Okay, I'm just curious. I'm trying to
Yeah,
visualize this.
but it's an ongoing project. I mean, that whole area is so intensely involved in our national security and in commerce.
Oh.
More goods go down the Ohio River than flow down the Rhine River. It's just amazing. I'm involved with the Kentucky Waterways Alliance. I'm kind of their artist in residence. Part of what we do is look at where along the Ohio we might be able to have more natural process be involved. Take out certain kinds of dams and those kinds of things that are actually dangerous and don't function as they should.
Okay. So this is a question more about your, does it sound like an activist?
Social practice guy.
Well, the activists, I kind of imagine
I'm
that
totally
carrying a
teasing.
sign or something.
Albert, I'm totally teasing you. It's just my sense
Oh,
of Okay, so now I'm interested in your process because I know that all this, you collect a lot of things. I'm imagining you have a warehouse full of all sorts of stuff you pulled out of the Ohio. And what?
I don't know where
You
else.
don't know where else? Okay.
I'm very selective about what
Oh, that, okay, that's all right. So I want to know, what is the longest time it took between gathering refuse, flotsam and jetsam? That's great. You don't get to use that word much, but this is appropriate for this topic. Gathering the refuse from the river and finding interesting use for it. And are such acquisitions ever automatic? Do you have a list of shapes and forms you need, and then you suddenly see it float by and you go, that's what I'm looking for? Do you fish everything out, or do you let most things continue on to the Mississippi? In other words, do you take out only what you think you can use, or do you try to clean up the river as much as you can? And where do you store your reward?
lot there in that question.
I can repeat it if you need.
I don't pick up everything that let's say over a period of time I have developed a vocabulary of forms and materials that I like to use. Styrofoam being one of them, but I use various plastics.
Bicycle helmets. That bicycle helmet one is my favorite.
Yeah, coal. I also use aluminum. I use just every kind of plastics that there are, just the worst stuff that I can find. One thing they all have in common is they float. So that kind of becomes something that also separates what I collect. The things I find I kind of view as almost being a part of some kind of universal subconscious. These are things that we collectively have made and somehow been put into the river, which becomes a kind of common experience that these materials have, and which all of these things then become acted upon by the river. So for me, I kind of respect the process of the river trying to deal with these forms, particularly the styrofoam. It's such a staticky kind of material. The way the river kind of shapes it, kind of, in my mind, almost humanizes it.
Right, like
in ways that I can't. I mean, I could spend a lot of time trying to do that, but I'd much rather respect the river and let the river be a part of that process as well, right?
okay, so we've got that you don't take everything you see,
No.
and you don't always have a use for something.
No.
But what's the longest time, like you got something you thought it was interesting, and then you finally, like 6 years later or something, you don't know?
I'm sure there are cases of that. Probably the body, I might have had that for 10 years.
Okay.
And an idea comes up with it. Sometimes most of my ideas come really quickly. And I'll go to the river and I'll do 6 or 7 projects in a day.
Oh, and you're actually making these things on site?
And usually leaving them.
Oh, okay.
When I have a reason to show something outside of because again, I have limited amount of space. I don't really have a full
Oh, so you actually
studio.
you do this kind of almost as like an exercise then? You make these things, you put them together. When I say exercise, I don't mean.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I have played around with that especially very early on. I would make things and leave them there, and I would say to myself, well, if I did my job as an artist right, somebody else will pick this up for me, and they did. Right? I'd make these figures, stick them up, and come back and wear the thing.
Okay.
Sometimes they would get destroyed. Many times they get destroyed, but a lot of times they walk away. So I'm okay with that. A lot of other things that I do are not figurative. They're much more abstract. The kind of assemblages that I make that are like made of plastic jugs and stuff, and or hundreds of cigarette lighters that I picked up, that week.
That week, my goodness.
Yeah, thousands.
Well, those are all the questions I've prepared, so maybe there's some questions in the audience. Or you guys can ask questions of each other. Do you have questions for each other?
Well, you mentioned the other day when you dropped off your work that your son thought you were just like paupers because you worked in trash, which I thought was a funny story. And it just
my youngest son revealed that to me. He said that he'd have friends come over to the house, right? And where I keep my art stuff is in the basement, and so they would go down there, and I never thought about the poor quality of what I'm using, that it would have that kind of, give somebody that kind of impression that we were like poor, But okay.
You collect trash.
Yeah. But the styrofoam, I mean, it's just such a weird material, it's so far outlives its useful life. So.
Albertus, on your basement door, do you have like down here we float?
Practically. I think the river occasionally tries to go into my studio and take it away. Interestingly, one of my rules is I don't accept trash from other people. People try to give me stuff all the time. The rules of my game are I can only collect and work in this site, in the Falls of the Ohio State Park. And I have found more than enough stuff. In fact, driftwood, I would say that's probably one of the best driftwood places now. Would be a good time because we just had the river be really high. I'm actually very excited to go back there because it's such a dynamic environment. It'll be rearranged. There'll be amazing, awesome things to see, like refrigerators in the tops of trees, stuff like that. It's like you never know what you'll find. But I'm also out there really plugging into the actual life is there. I'm into birds, right? I'm into everything else as well that's out there. I've tried to identify all the plants that live there, all the insects, all of the birds, I know the mammals are, there's so few of them that it's pretty easy, but just everything else that's relational to, the art can't be a standalone thing for me. It has to be part of other things.
What about styrofoam? Where do you source that from? Is that a part of trash?
From the river.
From the river?
Yeah.
everything's from the river.
Yeah, if you can imagine the head and the body without the holes poked in it, that's exactly. I have not carved or shaped it other than to poke holes in it, right? You were talking about willow a little earlier. I love to use willow. It's one of the more common trees out there. And I actually count the beaver as a collaborator because like the legs on this figure here are willow, and beavers have chewed all of the bark off of them. And you can see their teeth marks, right? There's an
That's really good, collaborating with animals to make your art.
But the wood is so beautiful. It's like ivory. It's like ivory, the wood that they produce, it's so amazing.
There's going to be a documentary on it.
But I'm going to go stick some willows in areas and try to plant them, like that. That sounds really cool. I've heard of that before, but I've not tried that. And there's a lot of black willow down in the Falls. This is actually an environment, they call it a willow habitat. So, good place for that.
It's so interesting to me that you guys are both finding you're making pigments out of the water, you're finding art out of the water, and looking at this painting here is just all these cans in the water. and how interconnected all the work is.
Mhm.
And it's really fascinating.
Water is actually a more important problem than climate change. Way more important. If we address water, we'll solve climate change. If we solve climate change, we won't address water. Because water pollutes our planet, and we're breaking up all our rivers, and we don't think it started, but anyway.
Yeah.
The point is that we should have more focus on water than climate change. Climate change is important, but it will happen if we focus on water.
Well, it's tied together because
Absolutely.
for every degree Celsius, the temperature rises, 7% more water gets absorbed into the sky. And that's what causes the extreme weather.
Plus, you have
That's why we go back
30% of all the rainwater goes in the rivers, all that goes to the ocean, and these days it's responsible for 13% of sea level rise. It's just what goes into the rivers. So if we can keep all the water out of the rivers, we'll be better at.
Not all the
Sorry.
water.
Wetlands.
Yeah, it's fun to keep all the water out of the rivers.
When I
Because
first,
the rivers get recharged from the groundwater. They don't need to be, or from the water seeping through the soil.
Sure.
We don't need to get it from the rainwater.
Yeah.
That's the
Right.
point.
Yeah.
when I first started doing this kind of stuff, it was much more common to find other artists around the world who were interested in this, but they were all working primarily in marine environments.
Mm.
They've adopted stretches of coastline and beach. I found myself like one of the few, if only, artists working in a freshwater environment, in a river in the interior of the country, right? It's like all of these waters are connected. And sometimes in very, very interesting ways. I was talking to Paul, I did one bottle experiment I did with an artist. We threw 4 bottles of notes into the river. I'll be darned if one wasn't picked up and impounded in northeast Mississippi 8 years later. But it was not the traditional path that would have taken. I thought it would have taken. Throw it in the Ohio, flows up the Mississippi, then it's in the Gulf of Mexico. But in the 1990s, they built the 10-ton Bigwee waterway system in western Tennessee, where the Cumberland and the Ohio and the Tennessee rivers, they all come together. And I'm thinking that during one of these high water moments, my bottle somehow changed elevation or something, got into this other waterway. But of course, somebody might have just picked it up through the most likely scenario. But in case if you're trying to imagine how could it naturally be possible. So anyway, I have found a couple notes in bottles. They're usually kind of sad. And Mom and Dad, I miss you. I think.
So, Sue, it's gonna happen. You got a monograph coming out.
Yes.
That sounds like too much work for me, but you did it. That's great. So you're bringing up all these questions and everything, and I am curious because I'm not sleeping a lot, writing a lot of suspect emails, trying to find ways to be as effective as I can and bring people around to what we're discussing here, which is that it's a time to take action, whatever that means. And so I'm curious if you, in your research, if you kind of have some sort of placeholder for us for the time that we're in right now with art, eco, activism kind of thing.
What do you mean place that, like something we should be doing? Or
What
something?
do I mean? Do you have a view of like of a larger view, right? Like an overview?
Well, I have a very large view, but what I find problematic is getting the museums to take it seriously. That's my biggest nightmare. Okay, so if you add up all the shows that are ecological, there's lots of them. But it's difficult to get them to be visited and to take it seriously. And it's weird for me because I've done 4 eco art shows. They're super popular. People love them. No one comes and they're angry. So in a weird way, it's a no-brainer. Like museums, but the thing is, we haven't trained art historians. Not only do we need art historians to do a PhD in land art, which there's maybe 4 in the nation, and there's 3 eco art programs that I know of, Oregon, Arizona, and New Mexico. So we don't really have enough scholars in this field. And when you don't have enough scholars in the field, then the museums it doesn't trickle down to the museums. The museums need, like, if they're gonna hire a new contemporary art curator, and then they're like, we'd like to do an eco art show, like, they don't even know where to begin. They're just sort of like, it's just not very popular. It's never been written about in Art Forum. like for
Yeah.
example.
Yeah.
You know, like back in the day, in the 70s and 80s, land art was written about a lot. But these days, like there's a group, do you know Eco Art Space?
Patricia, of course.
Yeah, okay. So Eco Art Space is huge. They have 600 or 700 members. And they publish all the shows every month. There's loads of them, but they're all extremely obscure. And I'm gonna just tell you, I understand the problem and I don't understand the problem. So one problem that I understand that when I first began working in this field is that the artists who are in this field, most of them have no interest to show. They're so busy doing their projects and they're in the world and they're very excited about what they do. And the idea of having to show their art or to make art to be shown is just a pain in their neck.
Well, part of that too, there's something about the gallery that is so self-referential that it's actually removed from life in some respects. I prefer seeing my stuff at the river
Okay.
because it's in the context of where it was. It seems almost natural there. When you bring something into a gallery, it becomes so, it's against a white
But I have
wall
to say-
on a pedestal. It's just so self-referential. You're trying to erase things around it. Not in all cases, but I often wonder why we didn't try to create galleries that were actually vacuums. Or the vacuum of space. Maybe I should come up with an idea that NASA was put our object in orbit. So,
It's already been done.
Yeah, it's been
Been done. All right.
Well, I don't know. I have to say, one of my favorite things. Okay, I brought the Harrisons here in 2012, and we did most of their indoor farm, which they stopped doing because they knew it was a failure because it used too much energy. But it's still, to put an indoor farm in a museum I had to really make all the threatening things I knew how to make. But to see it at the Whitney this last spring, they only had 5 of the orange trees, but the fact that the Whitney bought it and they installed it and it was in there, it looked just normal. It didn't look like we had to build a fence, like a screen door around ours because it might get in the ventilators. And this is the problem, that you have, like a lot of these artists working on these ecological things, they're using soil and they're using living matter, and the museums are really afraid of it. And so they either don't have the expertise to do it, they don't even know where to find the expertise. It doesn't cross their, I don't know, it's very complicated. But more and more and more, the generation of artists that make eco art in 2025, when they're doing their eco art projects, they're also thinking, how can I visualize this? So they've gone into this new 2-track system, whereas before, they were only in the 1-track system, and it was very difficult for them to think about, like for example, what's great with your project is that you're working with scientists and you're doing your on-site project and you're doing your painting project. Whereas before, they would only be doing the on-site project. And then you're like, how do we do your on-site project and put it in the museum? They're like, I don't care, you figure it out. It was so they were really, some of them were pretty aggressive. But it's that part's working itself out. We just need to have more museums that are,
I had a discussion once with a museum curator. Says, nobody's going to buy your art. And I said, why not? She goes, well, it's made out of styrofoam. It's not going to last. It's like, as though contemporary art we're concerned about archivability. Hence your, Joseph Beuys wedge of fat on a chair.
yeah, exactly.
But but a styrofoam cup has a shelf life of 200 years. If in that time if anything I made is worth saving for posterity, they'll figure it out. A 3D print one or something. I don't know. But the archivability question is sometimes, as painters, you kind of are working with that idea, right?
Mm-hmm.
People are not going to spend a lot of money on something that's going to, they think, fall apart on them. So.
Well,
I have a question. There's a lot of poets who write about environment who have come to the conclusion that all poetry really is eco-poetry, because we're all part of nature and we're all in the world. The separation, I guess, of, I always wonder how that works against us as far as, just separating things out.
you mean like the nature culture divide?
Yeah, just.
I don't believe in it. I think we're all nature.
Well, we are, but we've kind of there's an author, Anatov Goshen, I think is his last name, who wrote a book called The Great Derangement, and his whole thing was, in literature, when he was a novelist or is a novelist, and then he started writing novels that involved climate change. And there were all these publishers were like, oh, well, this is a fantasy novel now. He's like, no, this is what is happening, and I'm talking about what's happening. So there's kind of this divide where I think people don't want to see what's really happening, and so they sequester things, and you know, like, how can we break that down, I guess, is more my question, you know, of like changing how we categorize things, or not to, you know, it's, I think
By
that's
doing
part, that's what we're doing, yes, and part of the conversation is like to change it from being something that is separate from us and something that we're all part of.
Maybe we should start calling where we live habitat.
I
always thought, I'm an inhabitant, I live in a habitat.
yeah.
And it's not, you know,
What
I'm
ecosystem
creating
do you live
habitat. You don't agree?
No, I just started a nonprofit company called the Inhabitant Institute.
Okay,
Ah.
good.
We'll talk about
Oh,
this.
yeah. Yeah, but I think it's imperative that we think of our, and it's funny, I teach environmental philosophy and I have this discussion with my students, and they're like, well, I get what you're saying, Sue, but I can't really think of NKU's campus as habitat. And I'm like, why not? Because for them, like the built environment, like once you bring in concrete, but that's just our building material. Yeah, I don't see the difference between
Exactly.
concrete and, you know, a nest or whatever, like just,
I think that's part of our problem, is we have a problem of thought, a problem of perception of like, we're in a habitat right now. There's, you know.
And there's no such thing as a natural product. I mean, everything is from this habitat.
but I think if we thought of it as habitat, we might have more connection to it.
I
Because
think-
if we think of our inhabitants of our habitat,
Right.
it's a very different thing than like, I'm a visitor to this NKU
Yeah.
campus and I'm going to leave it and go to my home.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't know, I hope that people have a better attitude, or a different relationship to their habitat, if they think of themselves as inhabitants, but I don't really know. But that's a value question,
Yeah, it is.
that's what I'm saying,
And
that's why I think,
And I think the value question and the emotion thing, I listened to this Buddhist pastor does these Dharma talks, and the other day he was talking about one where, you know, which is, I think you may have heard this, where your emotional life is like an elephant, and then your thinking life, your brain, your conscious brain is like a monkey on the
oh
elephant.
yeah, the lizard brain and the monkey brain.
Yeah, so in this case, it's the elephant, and you can think you are doing something. Your monkey thinks that it's doing, but it's the elephant that drives you. So if we can get to changing core emotions, because maybe the emotion people have around climate is just revulsion or fear, and so they shut it off, you know. But if you can get it to hope or wonder, all those things, that can bring you back into a place where you can think about, well, how can I love this thing? How can I take care of this thing?
Well, one of my favorite things to, whatever, my bailiwicks, I guess it's called, is an SUV, right? And I'm imagining that with all this Terraform, I heard an interview with the BMW CEO, and he's like, you know, the only place in the world we make SUVs is the United States. We do not make a BMW SUV in Europe. So if you don't want to have, you know, all those factories that we built for you guys, we built them for you guys to buy the thing that you want, you know? So don't terror us because we are only thinking about you. Okay, so but that kind of, when I first wrote a paper about, not about SUVs, but about linking values and personal identity and climate change, I was thinking, like, why do people buy SUVs? And I have this feeling they think that they're safer. That's my thought, that they go in thinking they're interested in the environment, but the salesman, I should go and try to buy an SUV, then I know what they tell you. But then I'm sure that they tell you that they think they're safer. But what's interesting, I've tried so hard to find the research from insurance companies that say whether in fact SUVs are in more accidents. They are. I mean, you know, a lot of people say that like you can't even see over them. They knock over kids. I don't really know if that's true. But the point I'm trying to make is that I cannot find the research to prove or disprove whether or not they're safer. And that's already interesting to me because it's hidden somewhere. I'm sure the insurance companies know that information because that's how they would figure out whether to insure it or not, or how much to insure it for.
Well, wasn't it the dude at Ford who, when they were really coming along with the bigger and bigger pickups, that hopefully somebody can correct me on this, so do not quote me on this, but that the American roadways, that Americans see the roadways as a battlefield and their cars as tanks, and so this escalation
That's
into
funny.
big pickups and SUVs is all about you're there as an individual on
Vehicular
the battlefield,
warfare.
right?
That's what my husband
Not
said.
safer for your kids, but safer because the other person has like a Ram 3500 that you can't possibly like survive if you're in a Prius.
All the Ford F-150s are made in Louisville, and the reason they are is because that's how an American worker can earn enough money to of making cars. You know, having to sell a vehicle for $40,000-$50,000.
60, yeah.
That's what it takes to be able to, you know, satisfy an American worker in a factory situation and to make it viable. You know, I often wonder, it's like, I once had an 81 Honda Civic that was still getting 41 miles to the gallon after 350,000 miles of actual wear, right? So at one time, you know, during the gas and oil embargo, we actually worried about economy, you know, and gas and oil.
For a minute.
It's like a joke now. It's like, what?
Right, right.
This vehicle gets 12 miles to the gallon?
But that's what the Ford 150 are.
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, but I mean, I don't
That's
know,
why we have
something
EPA
else.
so cheap, you know? Just kidding.
I have two last questions. I'm sorry. One thing I noticed was you have your work on canvas here,
Yeah,
but then the last two pieces maybe are on a different material,
The
or
last
is it
piece.
not?
yeah, that's aluminum.
Aluminum?
Yeah.
Is there a reason why you changed the material?
Yeah, I wanted, so the initial process that I was doing was very, very full of fluid. Like, you know, speaking of automobiles, if you've ever freshly waxed your car, which I haven't since, you know, the 70s, but basically, you know, when rain falls on it, that bead of water beads up like a little, like, proud standing bead of water. And I use the aluminum because it's a commercial sign material that's really, really archival. And you can actually pour a crap ton of paint on there and it'll stay in that circle. Unless you put one more drop on it and then it goes off. So there's a 50% failure rate. But when it's on there, it would do these weird amalgamations of things that I wasn't getting with a brush, right? But after a while, it just didn't feel that it was telling the story I wanted to tell. So this is the first foray back into canvas, which I hadn't done for a long time. They're stretched over panels to give them solidity. So I'm really enjoying working back on canvas with more brushwork and handwork in it.
Yeah. And the last question is like work on sustainability and whatever all of you are doing. Do you feel like it's hard to sell the works that are more community driven or sustainability driven? And do you look into grants for projects like this, or do you feel that there's no difference in something, you know, that matches your curtain versus gives a message to the world?
Now, for me, it like I was saying before, they try and include like a more easy pop image
Sure.
while still telling the same story. And that's about accessing a bigger market, just to maintain my ability to make paintings. But that's about it, the only difference really.
Yeah, I think that for me, what I do in the studio, I've learned to preserve as a very special place where I'm not sure what's going on, but I need it. I need to do it. It's the way I stay sane in this planet. And I don't know what the value is in that space and in that time, so I give myself over to that. I feel like that's a very spiritual place for me, and I don't put a lot of those expectations or thoughts on it at all. I really don't, which is good. But over time, what I've realized is that the thing that is going to make anything I do effective at actually making change, going back to Sue's activist question, is building community. That's the only thing. So if that's going and talking amongst engineers, which is very interesting, taking groups out, like Albert has talked about, taking groups out to the river, getting them in waders, having them throw things in and drag things that are covered in orange out, whatever that means, that I think I've learned is where a really good amount of my time is going to be the most effective for actually creating awareness change. People that feel their habitats are theirs and their values attached to those habitats, right? And this is where, and I want to just give a shout out to Mr. Cronin here and Devin and the people here that work at the gallery, because doing the labor, the planning for this amount of time, this amount of people, this amount of events, to just try to have some kind of community come together where we can all understand, however small or large the group is, that there are other people thinking this way, that our values align, and that we're not alone in it. That is what I've found to be the most effective. I'm not sure I'm super effective at it, but I try. But what you're doing here, Paul, today, to be here with Stephen and Sue and Albertus here and stuff, honestly, like, just hats off to Paul.